Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Um, Welcome to this space. I hope some of you, many of you, most of you have seen the brilliant documentary that Sonita has made, Hostile, to explore the damage that the hostile environment has done to the people who are subject to it, but also to our wider communities, our neighbors and our friends and our families, and how we relate to each other. Um, Sunita is here. We're going to ask her a few questions about the film, about her creative process and her background, and how she relates to the topic. And we're also going to hear from Zoe Gardner from JCWI and another Europe about where we are at with the hostile environment, what has been done, what we still need to fight for, and I think we'll end on a hopeful note. We're going to talk a little bit about the positive developments that we had this week, and how we can build on that outpouring of support for people seeking safety, be it people from Ukraine, people from Afghanistan, people from Syria, people from wherever they happen to be born. Um, we are going to be recording this, I think you see, but don't worry, for the attendees, you're not on camera. It's only us on camera. And there will be a chance for questions from the audience as well. But I did want to prepare a few questions in advance for Sunita, because it often happens that as campaigners, we're very focused on the issues and the policies, and it's rare that we get to look at those issues and those policies reflected through artistic medium and artistic output. And that's why I was really keen that people in our network get to see the film, but also to ask Sunita some questions about how she relates the topic to her art and what prompted her choice to work in film and to work on the hostile environment and to work on hostile. So I'm going to start off by asking Sunita, why film? Why did you choose film as the medium for you to do work around immigration?
Thank you, Alina. Thank you for this. That's a really great question. I have never been asked that question before. And I really think that it was film, for me, it had to be the medium to tell this story because first of all, I was a producer. I am a producer. I embarked on my debut, and as I mentioned earlier when we were speaking earlier, that this story started off as a different story, and it wasn't a story about the hostile environment. It was a story about something else. It was a story about how migrant communities were keeping society moving during a global pandemic. And as I was filming that narrative, I learned about the hostile environment. And what I learned about the hostile environment initially was that it's very paperwork based. It's very, academic based. It's very informational, and it felt like a very difficult process to get your head around. For anyone that's subject to the hostile environment, it is incredibly frustrating. And as I was filming that frustration, I felt like I had to embark on making a film about the hostile environment. And I felt that I don't believe a film had ever been made about this subject matter before, but something that was a lot to do with applications and paperwork. I had to then determine how that would translate into film. And how I did that was by exploring the participants that you saw in the film and the threads of the stories that were so deeply connected. And that is why I have, those four interconnecting stories, because each participant told us a different version of the hostile environment. So it was really the narrative of the story that came to me via my participants that led me on this journey to put that into the medium of film.
Great. Thanks for Sunita. And I do wanna ask a little bit more about, I suppose, yeah, how the topic, the issue of immigration relates to your um, identity, and
Yeah.
if you would be happy to share some of those insights that we just um, talked about earlier before I started the discussion, because I think this is actually really
Mm,
important to ground the conversation.
absolutely. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, my own personal history was very much relatable to the film that I made. My parents were survivors of the partition of India and Pakistan, and my mother particularly suffered immensely from that separation because she lived in Lahore amongst Sikh, Hindus, and Muslims, harmoniously enjoying her childhood. And overnight, she was torn away from her community. They left very late in the evening in August of 1947, and she took very little belongings and she did not know what was ahead. And it was extremely grueling, extremely disturbing, and things that she recounted all her life. And it was horrific every time she spoke about it. So she walked for 16 days, almost died on that journey, and saw bloodshed and a lot of pain along that journey. She ended up living in a mud hut in what was New India, and that's where she met my father, not far from that community. So she was a refugee within India, and her own crises, their crises, brought them to England. So my father came first. He slept on the street, and it was a Caucasian man that helped my dad, got him work, and then my dad, worked in a factory and then set up a convenience store. That opportunity of somebody helping him gave him an opportunity. And then my mum came several years later, joined him, had 10 children, and their journey started there. I mean, my father died when I was 5, so my mum became a single parent. And she struggled immensely. She couldn't read or write English. She was on indefinite leave to remain. She remained that for her whole life until she was 88 years old. And I think those memories of my childhood and me growing up in an Asian working class community from parents that were refugees within their own country that crossed the border and were broke when they came to England. I think that was really the drive for me to make Hostile. I think that was it only came to the forefront in the pandemic when I started to deeply appreciate my life and my parents, because actually everything I saw around me during the pandemic were people like my parents. They ran the local corner shop, convenience store. During the pandemic, they would have been open 7 days a week. They would have been doing food deliveries because they were those kind of people. They were the hub of the community. My dad had a blue van and would deliver to all the elders late at night, early in the morning. He worked 7 days a week. So their story really were the people in my film. And I think about that so much when I watch the film, that Daksha and Paresh are like my parents, Farouk's like my brother, Anthony's like my cousin, the students are like my siblings. It's like everybody in the film felt like they were my relatives in the end. And so I was really probably recreating that in a way and trying to figure out my own placement in that and my own identity, because I am a British citizen. But I think for any second generation, you do feel this intergenerational trauma and you feel this identity crisis in a way, because you're not partly there and you're not partly here. And when you lose both of your parents, your connection to your bloodline is gone. So you even feel more disconnected. So there's a lot of personal things that I've had to go through when making Hostile, but I'm really appreciative of the experience actually in going through that process.
I want to ask you, and I think this, yeah, really relates to I suppose the experience that your family had. But did you, growing up, did you have the sense that your parents, after everything that they've experienced, that they felt safe? Did you think that?
Yeah.
Do you think the concept of safety is basically very different in a migrant community, in a migrant family?
Yeah, I mean, my parents worked really hard. Not only did they work in the convenience store, they worked in the factory. They saved as much money as they can. They put money into their pension, £10 a week. It wasn't a lot of money, but it's all they could afford. And I remember them just saving constantly because they just did not know what was ahead. You know, my parents kept their passports in a briefcase. That briefcase was then hidden and locked away, you know, and I remember the stories around that, you know, your passport is so important to you. This is your lifeline almost. Our identity became that passport. And yeah, I mean, I was surrounded by, you know, relatives that were on limited leave to remain, relatives that were on precarious visas, cousins and sisters that wanted to marry people that had come in via Germany or France that didn't have the right passport. So those stories were around me during my childhood. So I think there was also uncertainty that at one point, at any point, things could change in our lives. And I think that's why they saved so much. And that's why when my mom was a single parent, she worked 6 days a week in a factory. And I think that she always wanted us to be educated so that we could look after ourselves in the future and have the tools and the mechanisms to grow in this country. And that we did. I mean, my family's got NHS workers, business people, academics, you know, lawyers. I mean, it just, the list goes on, you know, and I think that that's reflective of their hard work ethic and the opportunity they wanted to give to us. So when I talk sometimes and I speak to people publicly, I sometimes think to myself, the people that you're sending on that plane, if you're going to do that, are my parents. Their children are the future me. And I married a Caucasian man and had children here, and I'm happy here and I've built my life here. So I think there's a lot to be said in that level of empathy that needs to be seen and sought right now in our country, because to turn away children and young parents is just, or anybody for that matter, is just a horrific thought. So yeah, I'm deeply grateful for what they've done for me. And yeah, their struggles were there, and they were throughout my whole childhood for sure.
So I suppose in a way the both the topic of the film, but also some of the stories, I suppose, the choice happened quite naturally. It sort of just grew from your experience and thinking about, as you said, about your place and how you relate to your background, but also to where you've grown up and where you're part of society here. But was it easy to get people to open up to you and to reveal their stories? Was working with the stories that you selected an easy process?
I think people were very guarded, and I think rightly so. I think that people were concerned because it was their life that they were opening up to the wider audience. And also, they didn't know me. So I was a stranger. So initially, there was a lot of trust to be had between myself and my participants. And a lot of that happened remotely because of the pandemic. And we did a lot of remote work with user generated content over the phone where I'd watch videos remotely. But then when I got to meet them face to face, it was about building that trust and having that confidence that I would do the best I could for this story and for this subject matter and for them. So a lot of it is about trust building along the way. And also a lot of it is about not manufacturing the story and making sure that you go with the story and you follow their narrative as it's unfolding. So I learned that about myself as a filmmaker, is that I kind of was present, but really not really there in a way. I just wanted them to be as natural as possible in their own environment. So I think that that trust came over time and that access came over time. And I was so grateful over that period of 9 months that I filmed, that they allowed me into their world and continued to do so. And then during the editing process, they were there to sort of verify bits of paperwork for me and information. And now in the Q&A tour, which has been going on since January, my participants have been there during that whole process, coming on tour with me, speaking publicly about the film and opening up about their experiences. So I think the process is about trust, it's about connection, and it's about integrity. And all of those things I believe that I've sustained throughout this process.
Yeah, I think it really shines through that you've given people
Mm.
space to tell their stories. And I suppose my question next would be, and Zoe, don't worry, I'm gonna bring you into this very soon.
Don't
It's
worry, I'm
just that
fascinated.
this is, yeah, exactly. This is how these things happen, right? When you have a conversation with someone who actually does really interesting things that you relate to, but also slightly different from our everyday experience. So I suppose my question is, how important is it, and what can we do to better do this work to give the space for migrants to tell their own story rather than for us to speak for migrants?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important question. Empowering them, even though they're empowered, giving them voice, even though they have their own voice. So it's like, what can we do for them? We all have access to our own social media. We have access to our network. You know, we have access to our MPs. We have access to friends and families just by raising awareness and speaking about this subject matter, going into communities where people are suffering, being on the ground with grassroots organizations, you know, just being in their company presence, hearing their stories, listening to them, having that level of empathy. I think what I've learned from this is when I get on that tube or get on that bus or walk down that street, I look at people in a different way since making this film, because I know that a lot of the people I'm walking past are probably experiencing things that I have portrayed in this film, right? Or they're experiencing difficulties in their lives, and understanding that they are faced with those difficulties. So having that level of empathy in society where we want to help one another. I think that sense has gone. Our community has gone, and we need to bring that back. The pandemic showed that we can do that. Now we're in a different crisis after the pandemic. We're in the flush out of the pandemic, Brexit, the war that's happening now between Ukraine and Russia. And then we've got everything that's happening with the migration and the immigration crisis. So it's that moment in society where we bed down and start thinking, instead of focusing on things that separate us, let's talk about the things that bring us together. What is our common ground? How can we work together to better society? So I think that's my positioning as a human being. And because of that, things have changed around me and things are manifesting around me. And my language has changed. I'm more inclusive. I'm meeting more people. I'm sharing more stories. The film is getting out there. I'm meeting people like yourself and Zoe, which is, to me, is so inspirational. And you're such inspirational figures to me. So it's like this is all part of that process too. So yeah, I think there is a responsibility for all of us to be part of that, and I'm part of that too. So let's continue doing that hard work. And I'm optimistic in for the future. I am.
Oh, that's brilliant to hear. More of that, more of people's optimism, please.
Mhm.
This relates to something that I wanted, yeah, to bring Zoe into, because we had the chance to think about that a little bit at an event very recently about the positive shifts and the positive shifts in the perception of migration that we are witnessing. Zoe, do you think we've just become better at, yeah, giving space and giving visibility to migrant stories and brought that closer to people? Is that part of the reason why in your work? What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, okay, so just to give some context to those who are listening, at this event that Elena's referring to, we heard how public attitudes have got so much better towards migration in the last 10 years, in ways that can't really be explained very clearly through normal ways opinions change, so like demographic shifts or serious changes in, say, like the level of the reality of the issue impacting people's lives. None of those things have changed significantly in those 10 years, and yet people's opinions are just so much more positive. And, I really do think that, and I think there is some evidence to support this in terms of like surveys that have been done on people explaining why they've changed their opinions. And that is that I think it's hard to remember almost, but 10 years ago, it just wasn't a normal thing for migrants telling their own stories to be something that happened in our media and in the world around us so commonly at all. I mean, I've experienced it just during my career, the difference between what journalists are asking people for what kind of stories we can manage to put out there through my work at JCWI, you know, and we still experience a degree of the journalist who calls you up and wants to know if you have a refugee fitting this criteria, who's gone through this trauma, who is in your filing cabinet ready to talk to them and share their trauma, and then, you know, just be a convenient illustration for the story. We still get that bit, but that used to be completely the norm. And more it's about, well, can we have a conversation with somebody who's willing, you know, to explain how these things impact them, and then take that step forward, which is what I think the films are so brilliantly, which is, you know, not just illustrate a story through your own experience, but also become a part of the advocacy and the story of changing it, what has happened to you, and engaging with why that happened to you and what part of like the political forces that are impacting your life, and actually being part of the advocacy to change that. And I think that that's such a powerful narrative, and such a powerful thing to bring into the conversation. And I have no doubt at all that that's contributed a great deal to people having better attitudes towards migrants, because we all know, you know, the areas with the most migration are the areas where people are the most okay with migration. And that's because when you meet migrants, they're absolutely normal people. And, you know, I know that sounds incredibly basic to say, but people do have to actually have the chance to engage with that in a real sense. And if you don't live in a place with a lot of migration, then those stories being told through other media is so important.
Yeah, I think that is also something that I've been seeing more of as a migrant, albeit from a much more kind of privileged entry point into the migration system, because I had the luck to benefit from freedom of movement, something that people will no longer have if they want to come to the UK and build their lives here. But I am noticing a difference in how accessible and visible migrant stories are. I guess to go back to something a bit more specific and focused, I suppose when we talk about the hostile environment, it's something that has been with us for 10 years now, hasn't it? And Sonita does a great job at showing what that actually means practically day to day, for the people in the movie. But Zoe, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the policy, where we at with trying to get rid of it? Is it more embedded than ever now that it's been with us for 10 years? Are we used to it? Have we become desanitized to it? Do we see it as normal, or are there still entry points where we can intervene and resist it? And you're on mute, sorry.
Of course I'm muted. I started going, well, of course I'm muted. Of course I do believe that there are still entry points, and there's still, I mean, every reason and every hope to keep working to overthrow the hostile environment, and maybe we'll get to like ways to engage in that. But I do think that you make a good point about it being embedded and normalized. And I do think that what we've got with the current government in particular is a real sort of entrenchment of the division between the sort of good migrant and the bad migrant. Right? So numbers of migrants have continued to stay high. They're a little bit higher than they were, you know, before the end of free movement. The demographic of those migrants has changed, but primarily we've also got a situation where every few months the government announces a new bespoke visa scheme for, you know, this time it's Nobel laureates, and this time it's people who've won a gold at the Olympics, and, you know, like for this tiny elite few who are characterized as the brightest and the best. That in contrast, obviously, with the extreme and really, you know, even for our country's shameful history of how we treated refugees, truly extreme and draconian treatment of people at the poorest end of the migration spectrum, the people in the most desperate situations, refugees. And one of the key things that's really important in how we're treating refugees now, with the Nationality and Borders Act, that now it's an act, it went through a few months ago, went through Parliament and was voted in, is that a lot of those measures of the hostile environment that previously were applied to basically migrants working in the low wage parts of the economy are now being applied to refugees too. And that's sort of like the grouping more and more of like one group of migrants that we don't help and we don't respect, and that we keep in a precarious situation, and we demonize. And then this tiny elite group that if you can be part of them, then you're the kind we want. And so a lot of the policies that came through in the Nationality and Borders Act are policies that as I say, impose the same hostile environment conditions onto refugees, even people who have been recognized as refugees. So that's things like severely limited short-term periods of leave. I mean, I think, you know, when you mentioned, and it shows so well in hostile as well, the way people have to carry, you know, big piles of paper and keep all these records, and what you said about your parents, like hanging on to their passports and always saving, you know, this precarity that we keep migrants in for long periods of time, now being introduced also into the refugee system to give people, even if they're recognized as refugees, only a very temporary leave and the need to reapply in order to stay in their homes where they're safe, where they built a life. So we are looking at, you know, a really horrible time. And I think what it demonstrates is, to a certain degree, a failure. I've just been singing the praises of, you know, all of us who've been successfully getting the stories of migrants out there and changing people's opinions. There have also been massive failures. And I think some of those have been, you know, playing into the good migrant, bad migrant narrative and saying, you know, like letting off the fact that we have brutal policies towards some migrants because they're not the right kind that we can tell a nice story about. And that means that, you know, now more and more migrants are being sucked into that not the right kind category and being subjected to the same policies. So I think it talks to sort of the need for us to stand in solidarity with all migrants at all time and never give ground.
Something that struck me as well when watching the film, which I also think is quite important, and maybe we need to find a way of just keep banging that point, is just how relatively mundane the process is, like how easy actually it is to slip into the wide network that covers the hostile environment. So how relatively easy it is for people to suddenly find themselves subject to the hostile environment. It is not just for some extreme cases. It is not for people who have, I don't know, found just an incredibly sneaky way into the country, or people who have somehow transgressed against our ways of being or any societal rules. No, it's actually really easy. But Zoe, can you tell us, how does one actually end up being subject to the hostile environment? What are the most common ways that people find themselves in that position?
That is a great question, Elena, because this is the thing that I so often want to emphasize, is that, you know, our public conversation is obviously so dominated with, you know, the relatively few people who arrive on boats. I mean, the last couple of years, it's been front page news like 11 months out of every year. It's just ridiculous, given that we're talking about, frankly, you know, a few thousand people. And much as their situation is desperate and we should be helping them, the focus on them is absurd. And when people think of illegal immigrants or undocumented migrants, they think of those boats. But those people, you know, they overwhelmingly on arrival present themselves to the authorities and make a claim for asylum. That means they are in the asylum system. We know who they are. They have documents. They're within the process. So actually, the people who are undocumented, and I did a big piece of research on this called "We Are Here," that maybe I'll find a link to and share in the chat at some point. But it was looking at, you know, how do people actually become undocumented? Because we know that's not the group that we're talking about. And we do have a significant population. We've got between about almost probably up to 1.2 million undocumented people living in the UK. But like the vast majority of them, according to our research, came here with a visa, came here in order to work or to study or to join their family members, whatever visa pathway they could. And then because they're on these temporary visas, and you have to renew that visa, and every time you renew the visa, you have to pay all over again. So you have to pay the fee to apply for the visa, you have to pay for the lawyer who's advised you on how to go through that visa process, you've got to pay the international health surcharge, so called, which is just an additional tax. So that's disproportionately expensive and may get more expensive during your time here because the cost goes up year on year, so you can't even plan for how expensive it will be. And you have to jump through all these hoops and prove so many aspects of your life and so many criteria that you fill just to stay in your home. And because for most of the lower wage migrants that we're talking about, they are on a 10-year route to permanent residence. So at every 2.5 years or 10 years, you have to renew that status. And so if anything happens to you, if you lose your job or you have a mental health crisis or one of your family members is sick and dying at the time when you otherwise would need to renew your immigration status, you may not do it, or maybe you're just flat broke and you're terrified and you don't know how to afford a lawyer and you don't know how to approach the process, right? You may just fail to renew. And actually, when you said about the banality of it, we have clients who just simply made a mistake because it's really, really complicated. And just a mistake can be enough. You don't get a second chance. You don't get the money back from that application. You make one mistake in your application and that's it. You can lose your status. And then obviously we're talking about people who've been living here for like 5, 7, 10 years at a time. They have families here. They're part of our communities. Obviously, even though they've lost their status, they don't leave. And that's the big fallacy of the hostile environment, is that, okay, we'll make life really, really difficult for people in those circumstances, and so they'll leave. But their lives are here. There's no, this idea of somewhere to go back to needs to just be dropped. Some people, are privileged enough to have a foot in 2 places, and that's great. But for most people who migrate to the UK and have stayed here for several years, this is home, and there isn't any concept, any prospect of leaving their families behind, their communities behind, and going back. So people stay and they put up with this horrific hostile environment, which means they can't rent legally, they can't work legally. And obviously that pushes them into exploitation. So all this is doing is empowering people who want to take advantage of people who are in those vulnerable situations. They can't report labor abuses, they can't report if they're attacked or abused, they can't report if they're the victims of domestic violence. They can't get out of this cycle, but their homes are here, and so they don't leave.
Yeah, I think that's a very clear, if quite depressing, explanation of what this system is designed to do. I think people don't often understand that even if I don't agree with the principle of deterrent anyway, but even as a deterrent, the hostile environment doesn't achieve anything because you're not deterring anyone. People are already here and they already are embedded in the community. They already have lives and jobs and responsibilities here. So all you're doing is basically ensuring that their lives are as miserable as possible for as long as possible. Sunita, does that tie with the experiences of the people that you met through the process of the process of working with the film? Does that, the general kind of policy outline of what it's designed to do and how it operates, is that how it ends up being in reality for people who live through it?
Oh, absolutely. I think that people feel like they're in limbo. From one day they could be documented, legal, the next day they could be undocumented and illegal. And it can literally happen overnight based on filling in an application wrong, based on not having the money to submit that application, based on the circumstances you're in right now, which deemed you not able to have that lawyer, submit that application, be able to follow through on the processes that you have to do to resubmit or to submit that application. It's just, you get to that 2.5 years, and my experience was particularly with Farouk, and you're thinking, I've got a family of 4 here. How am I going to get £2,500 per person, per application, plus my NHS surcharge, and plus all the fees that go along with it. This is a lot of money to come up with every 2.5 years. And you're on this 10-year track. And by the end of it, you spend all this money and you might not even get what you want at the end of it anyway. So there's this constant stress and anxiety of just not knowing your place in this society. And I think there's a reason for that. From my experience of making this film, I felt like the Home Office became, or is, and it always has been, a business. It's lucrative. This is a cash cowing exercise that allows this organization to do as they please. Every year, the charges are going up. Every year that we're seeing more and more people float between being documented to undocumented for no reason, only because of the fact that the restrictions around them are just getting more and more tighter. And I feel that that oppression then leads them to either become undocumented, therefore illegal, and then they get deported, or they just go home, or they just go under the radar. And you're right. I mean, I've met women on this Q&A tour. What's come out of this is horrific stories of people that have come to screenings that are subject to the hostile environment, but are in that sphere where they came lawfully, legally, and they're now in this really horrible situation. And domestic abuse and violence is on the increase with people that are subject to the hostile environment, because it stops you from speaking out and speaking up, because if you do, then you are identified and you're a number and they can come after you. So it's a really tough situation for a lot of people out there. So I absolutely experienced exactly what Zoe's just been speaking about. And a point that Zoe was talking about earlier, how this hostile environment is now spreading to asylum seekers and refugees. They're now subject to no recourse to public funds. And it feels like it's been a testing ground at every single step of the way. Oh, we'll test this hostile environment on, you know, people that are on this 10-year track, but now it's worked with them and we've got so much money out of them. Now let's test it on the asylum seekers and refugees. Oh, and by the way, let's test it on people that have dual citizenship, with what they were trying to do with the Nationality and Borders Bill. So I think it's just like all of it seems to be a process of testing between different demographics of people with different visas and different statuses. And I think that's only going to continue to happen if we don't do, or the organisations like JCWI that do it so well, really raise this awareness and put it at the forefront. And I guess, you know, we may feel like, you know, we're hitting our head against a brick wall right now, but there will be change in the future, and that change will happen. And when we've had all this information, we've raised all the awareness, we've given them all the information, whoever comes in next or whatever arrangement is there in the future, they might look at this hostile environment and think, what have we done? And that turning point might happen, you know, hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years. That's what I'm considering at this point.
Yeah. Let's hope it's even quicker than that, but yes.
Yeah.
Go for it, Zoe.
Sorry, just because it really spoke to me what you said about how this is basically a money-making exercise on part of the Home Office. It suits them very well to have people forced to pay again and again and again to stay in the country. But I think what it made me think of is also the sort of lie that you know, that our society isn't built off the back of the labour of people who we can, you know, in theory say shouldn't be here, right? So the vast profits that can be made in this country by business owners like Deliveroo and, you know, the other areas of work, especially in the gig and platform economy, but, you know, in agriculture as well, is a huge problem. In lots of parts of the economy, they actually rely on the labor of exploited people who, you know, we say, oh, they shouldn't be here. But if they weren't here, realistically, who'd be sewing those clothes together for you to sell at that price at Boohoo? Who would be putting this stacking the supermarket shelves? Who'd be opening the petrol station at, you know, 4 o'clock in the morning to deal with serving up those things and being paid nothing for it? So like it's a part of our economic model. It's built into our economic model that we can exploit a group of people and then also demonize them as the problem. So I just wanted to highlight that, but I wish I hadn't, because I much preferred what you were saying about how things are going to change. And I am with you, and I do think we'll look back on how we treated people so poorly for having a different passport, and it will be one of those things that people look back and say, I can't believe that they did that.
And just to add into that, Zoe, it was also something that came to the forefront because of Brexit, because of Europeans with their settled status. And then you start seeing that hostility stretch into those people that were here working, as you say, in, you know, those labour jobs. And we're seeing it now with the shortage that we have here, the labour shortage that we have here, because people are just too scared to stay. So our European, you know, workers that were here have now gone home, and we're seeing it in restaurants, in bars, in cleaning jobs. You know, there just isn't the opportunity out there because there just isn't the support. So I think that this hostility is not just for people that look like me. You know, this hostility is stretching to people that look like all of us in this panel today. And I think that's the scary point of the hostile environment, is that it bleeds throughout the whole of society. When we start thinking about it like that, then we start thinking that actually it's affecting all of us. You know, we all have businesses, we all have work to do, and in that line, it will all affect us in the end.
Yeah.
And that's why the boss of an organization, you know, whoever it is, that they will be subject to this hostile environment themselves, because they won't find the Farouks, the Antonys, the students, the Dakshas, the Pareshes, just won't be here. And that's going to be the effect that our society will have on in the future. It will actually affect our economy massively, you know, and not just economically, but culturally, the cultural significance of when my parents came post-war, how Asian people have given their cultural identity to our society. And we want to see that continue to grow with all other migrants coming here, you know, and have that future where we have that inclusivity. So yeah, so just some thoughts on the back of Zoe just said. It was something that I was thinking of.
Yeah, I think I think you're both like very right in identifying just the various ways in which the system relies on the very people that it's demonizing and you know, drawing the money out from, because migrants are then paying twice, because they are at the same time they're working, they're doing all of these other things that the country, the economy, the system benefits from, and then they're also made to pay a second time every time they need to restate their intention to stay and reapply and do whatever needs doing. But I was thinking another way in which the system kind of manages to exploit and to extract again is through, in a way, I'm not trying to minimize the amazing place and the effort and the kindness that this comes from, but I kept thinking when I was watching the film and I was looking at Daksha and Paresh's massive operation, just how much the care for others has been outsourced, right? We are there, of course we are part of a society, part of a community, and we're there to look after each other. But at the same time, it should not be down to a wonderful, amazing family to feed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on a weekly basis. That is just not, that's not right. That's the completely Victorian dystopian system. It should not be down to them. And I just wanted to bring that story and that particular story from the film, because they also didn't really get the recognition or the support for the work that they were doing. And I'm wondering how are they doing? how are Daksha and Paresh?
I mean, I think that's a really good point, because every food bank I filmed at, because I did go on a bit of a food bank journey because I wanted to, in my own mind, just seeing what was happening. They were all saying that they shouldn't have to have a food bank. This community shouldn't have to rely on this food bank. There shouldn't be a need for food banks in our country. And so Daksha and Paresh also felt the same, but they felt they had to. You know, they were in a community, you know, in Brent, that had a high number of people subject to no recourse to public funds. They also had a high number of people that had COVID cases, you know, whole Somalian families being wiped out in one particular community in Brent. And it was horrific times. I think that, you know, now, and as you saw in the film, Daksha and Paresh tirelessly tried to keep their unit open because they felt like they needed to continue to support them, because The support wasn't there at local authority level, because we all know that local authorities have been squeezed over the past decade. We also know that the help is not there from the government. So the help then has to turn to people like Daksha and Paresh. So they wanted to keep their kitchen open, but unfortunately they couldn't find a space. They tried so hard. I actually went with them to different spaces to try and find a space with them, but they just couldn't in the end. It was unsustainable and they couldn't afford to keep this going themselves. So I think in the end, they, as you saw in the film, they closed down. That closure kind of drove them out of London. They had their own crisis in a way, that they just felt that they were helpless and that they had failed, you know, and to feel that after making like up to 2,500 meals per day, and then not to do it at all, and to feel like you're letting down not just Brent but further communities, kind of drove them out of London. And then now they're kind of working in their jobs, still cooking from home, helping communities within the community they're now living in. And after that, they were awarded an MBE for their services, but they were like, please, can we have the kitchen back?
Yeah.
Please, can we do what we want to do? And that is to help others. So the government know, and the authorities know, that there is a fallback to these food banks. And I think that that is ever so prevalent in our society now. And I think what we need to do is to change that. We need to put that back into the people, because people don't want to rely on food banks. When I was filming the food banks, you know, I didn't purposefully film people taking the food, eating the food out the containers, because that to me went a step too far. I appreciated them in terms of having their own privacy, but when I spoke to them off camera, it's something that they didn't want to do, but they had no choice. By the time they've paid out all of this money, they don't have money at the end of the week to pay for basic food, basic needs. So that's where people like Daksha comes in to help them, but they would rather not. They would rather not. And I think that was evident in the people that I met. So yeah, that's their story now.
It's heartbreaking for me, and I'm sure for everyone else, to hear that they felt that way. They were made to feel that way after the incredible effort that they put in, because whatever else, it was just, yeah, it was such an amazing human response. And it makes me so angry actually to think about that now, that they were made to feel that way about the work that they did in their community. But I'm going to try and move us to, I suppose, kind of a final point for me. And also I will encourage, if anyone in the audience wants to ask questions, we already have one question from Christine to do with the media. And actually, let's look at that first, and then I'm going to end on my question, because, as you know, I'm going to ask you about a hopeful angle and what gives you hope. But let's look at the media. So Christine asks, how do we get rid of the media amplification of hostility towards migrants? It is true in a way that sensationalizing and making things about conflict sells, right? It sells headlines, it sells newspapers. So how do we deal with the media? Zoe, you've had to do so much media work this week, and it would be interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's one of the $1 million questions, isn't it? Is, you know, how do we make the media be better? I mean, one of the things that is for sure is don't amplify the shock jobs. Don't engage with the shock jobs. Don't give them clicks. There's always going to be someone who realizes that if they say something truly hateful, truly horrendous, that they'll get Twitter famous, and maybe they might even get a gig on Talk TV. And the more we can just control ourselves and just be like, you know, see through what they're doing, the better. But then again, you know, like, yeah, so I think probably my wider point does go to that. And I guess it's only a very small part of a very big question. But like, for example, you know, I've been doing a lot of media in the last week over the Rwanda deal. And journalists are very entitled people, some of them. Not all journalists hashtag that. Still, some of them are, and once they get my personal number, they do just like to call at any time of the day or night and just be like, do you want to go and do this? And I'm like, this is why we have a press index. But anyway, I got a call when I was walking into work from a guy from BBC Three Counties Radio, and I thought, well, BBC Three Counties Radio, that really can't be so bad. And they were like, we need to, someone's just dropped out, can you come on and speak to our presenter, Jonathan Van something or another. Anyway, if you guys know him, not a nice guy. So I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I'll talk about Rwanda to Jonathan Van, whatever. And the guy was an absolute, I mean, jerk, like really, really bad. Like he just was there to have a fight. He like was trying to drag me into talking about, well, you know, like where should we be building houses in this country to house all these refugees? Like he was really, really going for me really, really hard. And I don't mind having a debate. I don't mind, you know, talking to people who deeply disagree with me or who just are presenting the other side. But this guy was an asshole. Like, I'm sorry, he really was. And so then I was quite upset and angry after that call. And I just spoke to the people that normally I would go through if I was going to do a media appearance, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, I wish he'd had time to come to us because he's red listed." And that we do that with lots of people. Like, not lots of people. Like I say, we happily talk to people who we disagree with, but there are people who are doing it in order to whip you up, make you angry, deplete your energy. And I was out of sorts for the entire day, right? A lot of the power of this government and of the hostility of governments in general when they do this, it's about depleting our energy and making us get so angry and so upset that somebody can say this now, you know, and actually they're just taking from us and sucking from our energy and our ability to go about doing the better work. And so that, you know, we need to share that information and have, you know, our red lines and have the things that we're like, you know, you're just doing this in order to provoke the debate, and you're not trying to in any way engage with me meaningfully and find solutions and find common ground. It goes back to what you were saying, Sonita, about finding common ground with people. I think that's what we need to do, and we need to just be as tough as we can to stick to doing it.
Sonita, how has the reception to the film been? Have you had, I hope you've not had any need to engage with hostile media interviews, but
I was just the thought of the back of what Zoe was saying in terms of the media. You know, I felt, people have asked me whether I felt like I've been a journalist on this journey, and there has been a journalistic side of discovery with this, and having to find those stories, but also to be impartial and to make my own judgment based on what the participants have told me. And yeah, I was so horrified by the negativity that migrants get in the media. And there are now media outlets that are independent and that have integrity, like Double Down News, Novara Media, Byline Times. You know, there are other sources of media out there now that you can get news that is more balanced, that you kind of see both sides. So I do encourage people to look at those news outlets. I think for me personally on this journey and the response it's had, you know, the film had its premiere in October 2021. And then I didn't realize how much this film had impact on everyday people that don't know about the hostile environment, people that didn't know about these stories, and people that have just taken to the film because they felt like they either had a responsibility or a personal connection to the story. So from October 2021, we then got longlisted for British Independent Film Awards. I was then longlisted at BAFTA. I then had a cinema release from January 2021, which is still going strong today. And then we've been in a number of festivals, and I've done a number of Q&As. I've been to law firms, to universities, to Parliament more recently. And the list goes on. I've loved going into communities and speaking with communities and grassroots organizations. So I think the response to the film is reflective to the response to the individuals on the ground that are signed up to make change. And that's what I feel. Being on the ground for the last, well, since October to now, I've seen this change. I've seen it, I've heard it in audiences. I've been challenged. but I've also heard people turn their opinion because they don't know this story existed. So that I've seen that change amongst people that don't come from the demographics of me, that don't come from the demographics of the people within the film, that have not had lived experiences, but yet feel that some way this is impacting them because they feel like, oh my goodness, this is happening in our society. We need to do something about this. The embarrassment is there, the kind of helplessness, the kind of awkwardness, like, wow, how is this even possible? Kind of like, are we proud to be British? I've had people question themselves at screenings, you know? So it's like that journey for them is now empowering them to go and do things. So I think, yeah, there's been a huge response to the film. And I think that's testament to the stories of the individuals. People have responded to the film because of Farouk, because of Anthony, because of the students, because of Daksha and Paresh and Ilyas, and everyone else, all of the academics that have spoken in the film and the MPs, and just people resonated to the story. And I'm so grateful for that for so many reasons. And they continue to do so. So long may it continue, really.
Indeed. I think ideally we want everyone to see it at least once, because I think it really is how you start building change, right? Like to challenge people from different angles and through different media. Zoe, what gives you hope? What gives you hope for the fight ahead?
I may be a crazy person because I don't seem to ever quite lose that little grain of hope. Days like, you know, we had this week where the number of people who are going to be taken away on a plane to Rwanda dropped and dropped and dropped before our eyes, and we were just hanging on literally to the last minute before the plane was supposed to fly for it to drop to zero, and it did. And that is obviously thanks so much to all the legal firms and the lawyers who took those cases. But it's not just them, it's about a movement that is built and built and built and built, and all the people who in whatever small way contribute to that movement and build and build and build. That is our payoff when we get days like that, where you actually see, 130 people's lives like protected, and how thousands and thousands of people responded to our online actions, email the airlines that are operating the flights, email your MPs, speak up, come to the demonstrations. Thousands and thousands of people were doing those things up and down the country. That's the kind of thing that gives me hope, because it actually does change things. And I think that, to bring it back full circle, what we were talking about with the polling at the beginning of the conversation, that can sound intangible. Oh, opinions are changing, but it's not intangible when you see that kind of action result in such truly heartwarming outcomes on a day like that. And that is, that's an effort from every single person, like I said, who did anything to raise their voice about these issues. So yeah, that makes me think we can keep going.
That's great. We can definitely keep going. What else is there to do? We have to keep going, right? Sonita, do you wanna say a few words? I know you sent me that leaflet, and everyone who watched the film will get a copy. But I'm also gonna send it to our list after this conversation. Do you wanna talk a little bit about the campaign that has kind of built around the film?
Yeah. I mean, really, I think we're now in the stage where we're going to start that campaigning. Now we're coming out of the cinema, going into organisations, and kind of, for me as the filmmaker, I guess, what Zoe was saying earlier about what happened this week, and I was just so overjoyed by the response. And just seeing the work that JCWI were doing was just terrific and phenomenal. And I feel like where I see hope is within those organisations, but within people coming together, organisations, communities, MPs on the left and the right, Lords, all different parties coming together for one purpose, because they are against what's happening right now. So that's where I see hope. Our campaign is specifically around no recourse to public funds, raising that awareness. What is it? Who does it affect? How does it affect you? how can you overcome the effects of no recourse to public funds? So it's now raising that awareness, because when I go on screenings, people don't even know what it is. So it's just, what is it and how can we overcome it? And that's our campaign, really. It's a very, it seems quite basic, but just raising the tones and the narrative around it, give people opportunity and insight to see the very real effects. You know, when you're employing somebody that has NRPF, you might treat them or understand why they are suffering so much. When you have that doctor in the NHS that's giving you your vaccine, you might think that they might be suffering from no recourse to public funds. It's having that level of empathy and sympathy within our society, which we so need. So our campaign is that. It's on our website. You can print the letter off, send it to your MP, tell your MP that you're not happy about no recourse to public funds, raise that awareness, join our campaign. And as we go out and speak publicly about the film, that's what we're aligning it to and tying it to. So yeah, we're now gathering and working with more organisations that work within no recourse to public funds. And I think our campaign will really come to the forefront in the next 2 to 3 months, where we're going into educational institutions, universities, schools, putting hostile on the curriculum, having them raise awareness at educational level. And then it's also going into law firms, and we're doing a legal toolkit and an educational toolkit. So we're looking at education and law, which will then feed into policy. And that's what we're doing. And it's all around hostile environment and no recourse to public funds. And I think that's going to take a bit of work, but we've started that process now. So if you can follow us on social media at Hostile Doc and come onto our website, join us however way you can, we would really appreciate that. But I'll just leave on one final story, that I did meet Rishi Sunak at 11 Downing Street on International Women's Day. And when I met him, I spoke about the people suffering from no recourse to public funds and the children that were suffering from no recourse to public funds and our responsibility. And I was happy to see in the spring budget that those that are suffering from NRPF now have free school meals. So thanks to Marcus Rashford and organisations like JCWI, and maybe a little bit about that conversation I had with him, you know, we are making progress. So, you know, totally join us on that journey if you can.
No, definitely. I mean, not to sound like a well-known supermarket chain, but every little bit does actually help. So we should be pushing from each and every angle. And also, before I say goodnight to everyone, I'm gonna, on behalf of Zoe, I'm gonna invite people to a lovely community event on Sunday. Zoe, do you want to do that yourself?
You go ahead and tell them. I want to find the link.
So JCWI and various
there's migrants organize, regularize,
Fridays for
Future, loads of people.
Yeah, some of the best people around basically are organizing a carnival of resistance gathering on Sunday, which will be a positive community event to show that the hostile environment is not going to divide us. And there's going to be entertainment and crafts for kids and food and all of the things that bring us together. It's going to be a lovely Sunday. So if you want to celebrate being together against the hostile environment, then come along to that. Thank you so much, Sonita, and thank you, Zoe, for coming along. It was such a pleasure to chat to you and to think about the art intersecting with some of the horrible structures we have ended up with in our society, but also how we are all empowered to change them. Thanks everyone who joined us, and this is obviously not going to be the last time we talk about immigration, but it was one of the most hopeful conversations we've had on it for a while. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
This is really great. Thanks, Alea.
Bye. Have a good night.
Bye. Bye.